So hello everyone, it is such a pleasure to be here with you today. And thanks again to the Laterna team for the invite. So today for the next 20 odd minutes, we'll be talking, as it has already been said, about an interesting book, The Power of Habits, by Charles Duhigg, an investigative reporter with the New York Times, who himself picks bad habits easily, and notably his love for fried foods, like he said. Despite the fact that this book had been written over 10 years ago, its ideals are still very relevant in today's world. I must say that when I first got this book and saw it had over 350 pages, small print, it was a disincentive for me, especially as I had just completed another book. And that book is called The Iceberg is Melting by John Coater, which for anyone who has read this book, you know that it has large prints, fewer book pages, and is extremely easy to read. I will also recommend that book. If you read Who Moved My Cheese, you will definitely like this book. However, once I got into reading this book, it was very easy to get lost in it, and I became extremely engrossed in the content. The author's style of writing was very, very fascinating, and it was filled with many real-life examples, which I found very relatable. So speaking about the book, the core of the book is divided into 3 parts, preceded by a prologue, and it also has an extensive index at the end. The good thing I found out was that the index also had notes, which were very interesting, and in total, the index had over 100 pages. So in long and short, really, you had maybe somewhere around 250 pages of the book itself to read. The first part of the book talks about how habits emerge within individuals, exploring the neurology of habits formation. And it focused on how to build new habits and change old ones. The second part examines habits. And, it talks about how successful companies were able to use amending habits to then build successful companies. And the third one looks at the habits of society, using examples of Martin Luther King Jr. and the success of the civil rights movement. And it also talked about Pastor Rick Warren, who built a very large church called the Saddleback Valley Church in the United States. Okay. The central argument of the book is that habits can be changed if we understand how they work. And that's one message I would want us to take away today. Habits can be changed if we understand how they work. And the book defines habits, and I would like to quote. It says that the choices that all of us deliberately make at some point, then stop thinking about but continually doing them on a day-to-day basis. It says the habits, the behaviors become automatic. And this is a natural consequence of our neurology. By understanding how it happens, we can rebuild those patterns. So basically, we can rebuild patterns once we understand how it happens. The prologue for me was an icebreaker. And it tells us about the story of a lady called Lisa Allen. She's 34-year-old, and the records show that she had started smoking when she was 16, had struggled with obesity most of her life, and used to be deep in debt and could not hold a job for any length of time. However, currently, Lisa was reformed. She had stopped smoking for 4 years, had lost 60 pounds, and had run a marathon since then. Interestingly, she also started doing a master's program and had bought a house. So she had gone out of debt and had then bought a house. So she was put in a room with several scientists, and over the 3-year time frame, they had poked her at different sites just to try and understand what had happened, together with a number of other people. And one thing these people had in common is that they had remade their lives over a relatively short period of time. And the researchers were curious to understand why. They wanted to understand how habits work on a neurological level and what it takes to change them. Lisa's story was very interesting, and I would encourage all the readers, any of you, to please just read her story. Her husband, and I'll give you a brief summary of what had happened to her. Her husband left her for another woman. She was very devastated and decided to go to Cairo to see the pyramids. In Cairo, unfortunately, things got worse for her. She continued drinking and had reached her lowest point in life. And on a particular day, the book tells us she went for a walk, and there she decided she needed to have a goal, something to work towards. She decided there and there that maybe that goal would be to come back to Egypt after a year, and then, interestingly, trek through the desert. She decided there and there that she needed to quit smoking to enable her achieve her goal. So the goal was a key thing for Lisa. She set her mind, despite it seeming crazy, as she was overweight and had no money. However, after 11 months, she was ready. She had quit smoking and she had lost weight, and she was on her way to the desert for this trip. And the story goes on, and this, the scientists there came to understand that one small shift in Lisa's perception that day in Cairo, and which the author describes as the conviction she had to give up smoking to achieve her goal, had touched off on series of changes that would ultimately radiate out to every part of Lisa's life. They then realized that by focusing on changing one habit or one pattern, and in this case for Lisa, it was smoking, it led to a significant shift. And they described this as a keystone habit, and this habit led Lisa to reprogramming her whole life and other routines in her life. And the book tells us that it's not only individuals that can change patterns, but companies also. And further down as I go on, we will see some other companies that were able to use these insights to get work done. Doctors, interestingly, did a scan on Lisa's brain, and it was very revealing what had happened. Significant changes were beginning to occur at a place near the center of her brain, which is associated to where hunger and craving was seen to be still very active in Lisa. So when she sees food, her brain produces the urge that will lead her to overeat. And they then, however, also saw something else, that a new activity was forming near her forehead, and which had become quite pronounced. They believed that and this place in her brain was where self-discipline and behavioral inhibition starts. And Lisa actually helps the scientists to discover something very important. And like I'm sure we all do certain routines, activities routinely. We wake up, pick up our phone. I definitely used to do that, but that's one of the things that I've been working on and gradually getting out of. And saying things over and over, same thing over and over again to our children. We routinely take walks using the same routes we go through automatically. Some of us wear our right shoes first, for instance, and if you think about it, these are how habits are formed, whether good or bad, over the years. And the research done by the Duke University, also in the book, shows that 40% of actions people perform daily were habits and not things that they actually decided to do. What I'm going to do next now is to give us some snippets of parts of the book. And like I said, part one, the habits of individuals. This part has 3 chapters. the habit loop, the craving brain, and the golden rule of habits. The habit loop talks about how habits are, how they work. And it is centered on the story of a man called Eugene Polly, also known as EP. Eugene fell ill in 1993 and was diagnosed with a viral disease. And the disease is caused by a relatively harmless virus that produces cold sores, slight fevers, and large mild infections. However, in rare cases like that of EP, the virus finds its way to the brain and causes significant damages as it chews through the delicate folds of tissues where our thoughts and dreams reside. Unfortunately, the damage is irreversible, and it was actually considered a miracle that EP didn't die. He, however, couldn't remember most things. Interestingly, not even the day of the week, he couldn't remember his grandchildren, and was a completely different person. He didn't even remember when he would eat, if he had eaten. And the book tells us that at a point in time, he would get up in the morning, he ate bacon and eggs, got back into bed. 40 minutes later, he repeated the same routine, ate bacon again, same thing he had done before, got back into bed and came back, continued doing it. He didn't even know how old he was. So a meeting with a scientist, the book tells us, a doctor called Larry Square, who later on then became EP's doctor, began to reveal certain patterns. And we now realize that EP that could not even remember days of the week was able to leave his room in the morning, and go to the bathroom without any difficulties. Doctors then started to watch, and they could find out that even at a point in time, EP could find his way home, even though, he didn't fully know. If you asked him the address of his home, he will not be able to recollect. Okay, from then on, he went on, at a point in time, the doctors even told his wife to be careful and watch how his movements were. But then when they realized that he could go for these walks on his own, they understood that certain patterns were beginning to form in EP's damaged brain. Further research showed that the brain was converting a sequence of action into automatic routines. And this is what the book author calls chunking. And it is at the root of how habits are formed. An example would be that automatically each of us would just go to our bathrooms and take our toothpaste and brush our teeth without even thinking about it. And this routine occurs by habit. Once we take our brain, our toothbrush, for instance, a portion of our brain which is responsible for motor control and motor learning, called basal ganglia, kicks off immediately, identifies the habits we have stored in our brain that relates to brushing our teeth. And once that habit starts to unfold, our gray matter is then free to explore other thoughts. We are also told in the book that habits are formed because the brain is constantly looking for ways to save effort. So once something becomes a pattern, the brain doesn't need to put too much effort in it, and it's constantly looking for cues, which offers a hint at which patterns to use. And the end, a reward then appears. The author describes this, next slide please, as a 3-step loop: the cue, routine, and a reward. And it tells us that the cue is the trigger, which tells the brain which habits to use. And the routine is just, a physical and emotional or mental state. And while the reward helps the brain to determine if this particular loop is worth remembering in the future. Over time, we understand that this loop keeps recurring and becomes automatic. It develops into anticipation, something we look forward to, and then the craving sets in. And this is the core of how habits are formed. Habits are powerful and they are very delicate. They are formed with or without our permission. So once that habit has been formed, it automatically just repeats itself outside of our consciousness and helps to shape our lives far more than we actually realize. And this is what actually the doctors Square realized, that EP was forming new habits. And as a result of this loop, despite the damages in his brain, he could actually walk around a familiar place that he had gone over and over again and not get lost. Because his wife, in this case, had severally taken him on that route when they would walk as a couple. The next two chapters talk about explain that habits can be ignored, changed, or replaced. And it tells us that it dwells on a kind of cue and reward, that loop that I showed, that helps to fuel habits by creating a craving, which then powers the habit loop, similar to what we saw in EP's situation. It was very interesting to learn how, in the book, an advertising guru called Cloud Hawkins, several years ago, was able to instigate the culture of toothbrushing, and when Pepsodent toothpaste was developed in the early 1990s, using the concept of cravings. And through his advertising campaigns, he was able to create a reward: white toothpaste if you brush. However, we realize the book tells us that the users of Pepsodent said that Pepsodent contained citric acid, as well as some dose of mint oil and other chemicals, which left a cool, tingling sensation in the mouth and in the gum. People started craving that sensation, and soon equated it to cleanliness. Once the sensation wasn't there, they felt that their teeth were not clean, and it compelled them to brush. And this craving led to the boom of the toothpaste industry. So habits are powerful from this, and they create some neurological cravings, which creep on us, and we are often blind to this. So again, habits they create a craving, and we get so used to it. But one thing that I was glad to see, that cravings do not completely have authority over us. And there are mechanisms, the book tells us, that would help us ignore these temptations. And I'm sure that we would like to hear a bit about those ones. We, however, need to know these cravings, what is driving these cravings, and then be able to work on ourselves. The chapter then tells us about another person, a coach, Coach Dongi, who was able to change new habits. And it tells us that what he did, we learned from him, that to change new habits or to create new habits, you must keep the old cue, deliver the old reward. So the cue and the reward remain static, but you must then insert a new routine. And I found that very insightful. The book tells us that that is the golden rule. And what he had done, Dungi, was to focus on changing habits of his players. So he was a coach to an American football team. And then he was able to get them to react automatically rather than making too many changes in the course of the match. And I encourage you to read a bit more about the story of this gentleman. His life was filled with all sorts of intrigues and also some personal disasters, which included the suicide of his son. And I'll leave you to read to that. Quickly moving on, part 2 also then tells us about successes, and it talks again about a particular company, Alco company, who the MD of that company used safety as his leading indicator. And it tells us that routines are, what organizations live on, and organizations have habits and are able to change habits, by creating routines. And it also tells automatic. I would move on from the story of Starbucks, leaving you to read it yourself, and then move on to an interesting last piece that I would just like to talk about, which is the neurology of free will. And the author then, in chapter 9, is able to then wrap up this particular book, telling us, are we responsible for our habits? And he compares the story of a woman, Angie Bakan, who gambled away her family fund and the inheritance of over $1 million. And also a case of another man, Brian Thomas, who sadly killed his wife while sleepwalking, mistaking her for somebody else who was breaking into the room. And the experiences, in the book was quite interesting. The court, interestingly, released Thomas because it says that, he wasn't a master of his emotions since he didn't fully understand what he was doing. In the case of Bahan, the summary was that, on the other hand, she was aware of her habits and therefore had to take responsibility to change her habit. She could have tried a lot better in that case. So in wrapping up, I would just say that the conclusion by the author was that habits can be changed. Once we understand these habits, we have our freedom, and then the habits are then become easier for us to grasp. I guess that during the question and answer session, I'll be able to speak a bit more and use some more examples from the book. But thank you very much. I hope that this has been useful, and then we will then go on to take questions. Thank you.
Are you a book lover or enthusiast? Do you need genuine and unique lifestyle products? Or are you looking for a place where you can find contemporary and a wide range of unique gifts for children and adults? Laterna is your go-to place for genuine and contemporary books and lifestyle products for wholesale and retail customers. We stock business books on management, leadership, financial success, entrepreneurship, personal development, and so much more. We carry children's fiction, non-fiction, educational books, CDs, and DVDs. We also stock Christian books on various themes, such as family life and parenting, church life and growth, spirit-filled living, love, sex, and marriage, to mention but a few. Laterna carries life and style books such as baby and child care, beauty and style, conception and pregnancy, crafts, and hobbies. We also carry adult, children, and teenagers' Bibles, educational toys, framed art, gifts, greeting cards, home and office fragrances, music CDs and DVDs, stationery, teachings, and lots more. Our stores are located at 12B and 13 Okoawo Street, Victoria Island, Lagos. You can also shop online at www.laternabooks.com. Laterna, your lifestyle hub for book lovers. For inquiries, call 0803-301-4462, 0906-0002046 or 7. Chat with us via WhatsApp on 0803-301-4462. You may also reach us on social media via Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook at Laterna Books and Laterna Ventures.